Good morning. Let's continue with a view from the zoo. This one's called Chaka. Uh, uh. The phone rang and my first thoughts were, who died? Why else would anybody call it 12:20 a.m. other than to tell you somebody had died? Hello, I answered. This better be really good or really bad, I thought. Richmond, how would you like a little adventure in your life? I recognized the voice of my boss, the zoo's young but very capable veterinarian. Sure, what's up? The police just called. They want us to catch a killer ape that's loose in Highland Park. Meet me at the zoo in a few minutes. As I hung up the phone, I found myself wishing he had not said killer ape. Of course, if a killer ape is loose in Highland Park, it would need our help. That was a rough neighborhood. I pushed my car to its limits, and the freeway lights and signs changed me like an onslaught of wooden soldiers. Charged me like an onslaught of wooden soldiers. They briefly appeared in my rearview mirror and quickly faded from view. As I drove, I made an inventory of what we might need in the capture of a killer ape. Tranquilizer gun, nets, ropes, and assorted drugs. My damp palms gripped the steering wheel, and I wondered if my boss would notice if I didn't show up. I was probably the only one he called, so I concluded he might. I skidded around the freeway off-ramp and entered the zoo's immense parking lot. Waiting at the entrance of the zoo was a black and white police car, and its red and yellow lights pulsating with anticipation. Two officers were sitting in the front seat. Your boss is already at the health center. He wanted us to bring you up. I jumped in the back of the police car, and we screamed past the security guard who was manning the gate. Killer ape, huh? I asked. Tore up his master real good. Went after one of our officers, too. That ape is one mean son of a gun. The officer didn't exactly say son of a gun. One of our guys discharged his revolver at it, but he missed. We'll get the sucker, though. By the time we pulled up to the Zoo Health Center, Dr. Bill Holzizer had already gathered everything we would need. He threw it in the trunk and jumped in the back seat. The car lurched forward, and in no time we were on the freeway with siren howling. We passed several cars, all of which looked as though they were standing still. I glanced at the speedometer and noticed that we were going 90 miles an hour. I turned toward Bill and asked, "So, what do you think we're up against?" He was the scientific type and would not speculate. He shrugged his shoulders and said, "We'll see." I have always suffered from an overactive imagination, and it wouldn't have surprised me if King Kong himself stepped on the police car when we got there. We flew down the ramp and wove our way deep into the residential area. It looked as though we had entered a war zone. The officers were stopped by a crusty sergeant who pointed into the night and said, "They're waiting for you at the command post." "Command post," I said, with a tinge of sarcasm in my voice. "What did you get us into, Doctor?" "We'll see," he said with a wry smile. Boy, sometimes those scientific types can really make you mad. There were police cars everywhere. All of them had their lights flashing on and off, and all the neighbors were clustered in small groups discussing the crisis. We arrived at the command post, and an officer with plenty of authority called for a mass meeting. Officers began showing up from everywhere. I'm sure there were more than 50. We were brought to the center in the group, and the officer with all authority said, "Men, this is Dr. Bill Holzizer and his assistant Gary Richmond. These guys are experts from the zoo. They're going to help us track down this ape." And he turned to us and said, "You guys are in charge. What do you want us to do?" Bill and I looked at each other, and I think we both wanted to laugh. Bill was the shy type. He was a very competent veterinarian, but there was no way he was going to order around the policemen that surrounded us. I didn't want to usurp his authority, so I waited for him to make the first move. He put his arm on my shoulder and said, "Gary is the capture expert. Let's let him take charge." "Take it," said the man with the biggest badge. So I did. "Is there anybody here who has actually seen the animal we are after?" I probed. A young officer stepped forward and said, "I did, sir." "Can you describe him for us?" The light wasn't too hot. He was big, though. I discharged my revolver at him, but I believe I missed. Scared the heck out of me. The officer didn't exactly say heck. Is the owner around here or any neighbors who have seen the animal? It would be really helpful if we knew what we were after. The owner's father was brought to us, and it turned out he was the man who had been attacked. Most of his upper body was bandaged, including his face. The owner was in jail on several counts, all having to do with possessing or selling narcotics. It seemed that he had developed a drug habit in Vietnam and brought it home with him. That's not all he brought. He also brought home a young pet that grew up to be something very large and very dangerous. I asked the man if he had a photograph of his son's pet, and he said he did, and reached for his wallet. As he handed me the picture, he explained how he had sustained his injuries. It seems that while his son was in jail, the responsibility of feeding the creature was his. The creature only liked the son, and attempting to get food into the cage was a daily act of courage. This was the night the father lost the battle. Blood was seeping through the gauze bandages, and I could just feel the tension building among the officers. I studied the photograph and was somewhat relieved to discover that the killer ape was really just a large monkey. It was a stump-tailed macaque and very large specimen with 2-inch canines. I addressed the father once more. Is there anything the monkey likes? I was thinking of a favorite food item and was unprepared for the man's answer. He was a Mexican-American gentleman and said with great enthusiasm, Chaka likes it when you say, Chaka, ah, ah. I don't know why, but it calms him down. I thanked him very much for his help and began to speak to the assembly of policemen. Officers, I have very good news for you. We are not after a killer ape, but a very large monkey named Chaka. Chaka is not the kind of animal that you would need to shoot, and frankly, I will not help you look for him if I have to worry about getting shot. If it would make you feel better, carry your nightsticks. The owner's father has just told me that their pet likes it when you say, Chaka, ah, ah. So I suggest that you go through the neighborhood, you repeat that phrase over and over. We will wait here until he is sighted, and then we will take over. He is most likely scared to death after being shot at and is simply hiding. As the officers spread out, Dr. Holsizer leaned over to me and said, Gary, it's not going to do any good for them to be saying Chaka, It will too. It will keep them calm. And if you think they're helping their own cause, they might not shoot each other. Then Bill and I got the giggles as Los Angeles finest went from house to house and from garage to garage saying, Chaka, ah, ah. A police helicopter thundered overhead and turned on its blinding searchlight. Backyards were bathed in light, and although it was 2 a.m., we had the passing sensation of walking about in broad daylight. Walkie-talkies crackled and squeaked as policemen checked in to report that they had not sighted Chaka. The helicopter search was finally called off, and we again heard the masculine chant, Chaka, Chaka, It sounded like a soundtrack from an old jungle movie, and it would have fit the moment if someone had said, The natives are getting restless. At 2:45 a.m., an officer came running up to us and announced that his partner had Chaka cornered in a garage. We grabbed our equipment and hurried to the site. Most of the policemen were already there. They parted to let us through so that we might enter the side door of the garage. When we got inside, we saw Chaka huddled under a small fishing boat which was sitting snugly on its boat trailer. Chaka was protecting his face from the bright beam of light that issued forth from the sergeant's blue steel flashlight. Chaka's body language was screaming, Don't shoot! Please don't shoot! His capture was not in the least dramatic. We laid a net over his trembling body and he fell over. I believe he was very near to fainting. We transferred Chaka to a travel cage and took him back to the zoo. He was kept there for 30 days in quarantine to determine whether or not he was carrying any transmissible diseases. He was then moved to another facility and we never saw him again. It was after 4 a.m. when I crawled back into bed. It had been a great adventure and one with a happy, injury-free conclusion. It was clearly one of the most memorable experiences of my entire life. I cannot recall any deliberate thought concerning God during the whole night, but he was there, caring, protecting, and I can't prove it, but I think he was laughing. One of the most comforting thoughts I have ever entertained is from a quote by Ruth Harms Calkins from her classic book of poems, Tell Me Again, Lord, I Forget. It says, Loving me as you do, you understand so well that when I want you least, I need you most. You see, even when I'm not thinking of him, he's thinking of me. It is then that he comes to me, and in my weakness his strength is made perfect. If you want to get a feel for the depth of this truth, then put down this book and read the book of Esther. It is the only book in the Bible that never mentions God in any way. Nothing supernatural is mentioned. But from the first to the last page, God is there, developing the character of a beautiful woman and protecting his people. We'll see you next time.